The house stood at the end of a quiet street, large and clean, with white walls and tall gates. From the outside it looked calm and perfect, like nothing bad could ever happen inside. Neighbors often slowed their cars to look at it. Some even said they wished they lived there. They did not know what really went on behind those walls. Inside the house lived a couple and their twin children. The twins were the same age, close in height, and often dressed alike, but their moods could change in seconds. One moment they were silent, staring at nothing. The next, they were shouting, throwing things, or crying so hard it scared anyone nearby. Many people thought the children were spoiled. Others thought they were simply bad. But no one stayed long enough to find the truth. The parents were not cruel people. They worked long hours and believed providing comfort, toys, and good schools was enough. They had money, space, and help. What they lacked was time. When the twins were born, life became louder, faster, and harder than they expected. Instead of slowing down, they hired help. The first nanny arrived when the twins were still small. She had years of experience and strong rules. She lasted 3 weeks. The second nanny stayed a little longer, but left one morning without saying goodbye. The third cried as she packed her bag. One after another, the pattern repeated. Some blamed the children. Some blamed the parents. Some blamed the house itself. 14 nannies came and went. Each one started with hope. Each one ended with exhaustion. The parents stopped feeling embarrassed and started feeling afraid. Something was wrong and no one could fix it. The twins did not listen. They broke toys, refused to sleep, and screamed when left alone. They pushed boundaries until adults lost control. The house felt tense, even when it was quiet. The parents argued more often. Not loudly, but with tired voices and long silences. They blamed work stress, blamed lack of sleep, blamed everything except what they feared most, that they were failing their children. Every time a nanny quit, the parents promised the next one would be different. They raised the pay. They shortened the hours. They added rules, then removed them. Nothing worked. The twins seemed to grow worse with each change. Soon, even agencies hesitated to send someone. The house gained a quiet reputation. Not spoken aloud, but known. One evening after another, Nanny left in tears. The parents sat at the dining table long after dinner. The food had gone cold. The twins were upstairs, finally asleep after hours of chaos. They said very little. Words felt heavy. In the end, they agreed on one thing. They still needed help. If not with the children, then at least with the house. That was how the maid arrived. She came early in the morning, carrying a small bag and wearing simple clothes. She did not ask many questions. She was told where to clean, what not to touch, and when to leave. No one mentioned the twins. It was clear she was not expected to deal with them. She nodded and listened. From the first day, she noticed the house felt strange. Too quiet at times, too loud at others. The walls held tension. Even the air felt heavy. While she cleaned the living room, she heard sudden shouting from upstairs. Then silence. Then crying. She kept working. She had cleaned many houses before. Big ones, small ones, happy ones, sad ones. She had learned to observe without judging, to listen without interfering. Later that morning, she saw the twins for the first time. They stood at the top of the stairs watching her. Their faces were serious, almost guarded. Children their age usually showed curiosity or fear. These two showed neither. They said nothing. She smiled at them.
Oh.
Gentle smile. Then went back to her work. The twins whispered to each other. Over the next few days, the maid noticed patterns. The twins acted out most when no one was looking directly at them. When adults were busy or distracted, their behavior grew louder. When someone tried to control them with strict rules, they pushed back harder. They were not wild all the time. Sometimes they sat very still, too still for children. Sometimes they watched others closely, as if waiting for something that never came. The maid noticed that no one really spoke to them unless it was to correct them. Don't do that. Stop shouting. Go to your room. There were many words, but no real conversations. she said nothing about it. She was there to clean, not to advise. But children notice who notices them. One afternoon, while she was wiping the kitchen counter, one of the twins entered quietly. He stood there for a moment, unsure. Then he knocked a glass off the table. It shattered on the floor. The maid looked at him. He waited for anger, for shouting. For blame, she simply said, "Be careful," and picked up the broom. The child froze. He did not move or speak. He watched her clean the glass, his eyes wide. No one had reacted like that before, she finished, and went back to her work. The child slowly left the room. That evening, the twins were louder than usual. The parents assumed it was another bad day. They were too tired to think deeply about it, but something small had shifted. The maid began to see the twins watching her more often. From doorways, from the stairs, from behind furniture. They followed her with their eyes as she moved through the house. She did not call them over. She did not chase them away. She let them be. The house still felt tense. But now there were moments, tiny ones, where it felt less heavy. A pause between screams. A laugh that ended quickly, as if the child was unsure it was allowed. The parents noticed nothing yet. They were focused on surviving each day. At night, when the house finally went quiet, the maid often paused before leaving. She looked at the stairs leading to the children's rooms and sighed softly. She had seen children like this before. Not angry by nature, but hurt in ways they could not explain. She knew better than to say anything too soon. 14 nannies had tried to control. The twins, no one had tried to understand them, and without knowing it, the maid had already done something different. She stayed. The maid had arrived to clean. But soon she found herself noticing more than dust or dishes. The house was full of invisible walls, invisible rules, and invisible fears. The twins moved through these walls carefully, always testing, always watching, but never feeling fully safe. The maid, at first, only focused on her work. She swept, dusted, and tidied, all while hearing the twins' voices echo through the halls. They shouted, they cried, they laughed in ways that felt unpredictable. She knew from experience that children often behaved loudly when they felt unseen. But here it was more than that. These children seemed invisible most of the time, even to the adults who cared for them. On her third day, she found herself in the living room, folding laundry, when one of the twins appeared. He was small, with sharp, cautious eyes. He stared at her, clutching a small toy. The maid did not speak at first. She continued folding. She let the silence fill the space between them. The child moved a step closer, then another, but never spoke. She smiled gently, not too wide, not too bright, just enough for him to see she was not a threat. Slowly, he placed the toy on the couch and stepped back. The maid looked down at the toy and said softly, "Thank you for showing me." It was not praise. It was acknowledgement. The child blinked and left the room. He did not run, did not scream, did not throw a fit. The maid returned to her work, her heart lightened by the small gesture. She did not know it yet. That small acknowledgement was the first seed of trust. Over the next few days, the maid noticed patterns in the twins' behavior. They were not constantly angry or sad. They were scared and cautious. They pushed boundaries because they were unsure if anyone cared enough to stop and understand them. The maid began to adjust how she moved in the house. She avoided sudden movements, loud voices, or strict commands. She spoke in calm tones, even when the twins misbehaved. She offered choices instead of orders. For example, when one refused to pick up blocks, she asked gently, "Do you want to put the red ones first, or the blue ones?" The effect was immediate. The child stopped resisting and began to respond. No shouting. No tantrums. Just small, careful movements. The parents noticed some changes, but dismissed them. "It's probably a fluke," they said. They were too busy worrying about their work, bills, and social appearances to pay close attention to small shifts. But the twins themselves noticed. They noticed that the maid did not yell, did not punish, and did not abandon them. They began to watch her cautiously at first, then with curiosity. One morning, The twins' father called the maid into the kitchen. "Could you watch them while I run an errand?" he asked. He did not expect much. She nodded politely. The father left, expecting chaos in minutes. But the house remained calm. The twins did not scream or cry. They sat on the rug, playing quietly. The maid did not hover. She did not try to control their play. She merely observed, occasionally commenting on their actions in a soft, approving voice. The twins looked at her, surprised. No one had ever let them play without interference. The afternoon passed with small laughter, gentle chatter, and a sense of peace that had been missing for years. The maid had never planned to be a caretaker in that sense. She was not trained in child psychology or early childhood education. She was simply someone who noticed, listened, and respected the children's feelings. Yet, that was exactly what they needed. By the end of the week, the twins began seeking her attention. They would come to her with small requests: a glass of water, help reaching a book, or just to show a drawing. She responded with patience and warmth. The parents were shocked to see the twins voluntarily interacting with anyone, let alone someone who had only been hired to clean. One evening, while the maid was wiping down the counters, the twins approached her together. They carried a small basket of toys they had never shared before. They placed it gently in front of her. Neither spoke, but their eyes held questions, doubts, and hope. The maid looked at the basket, then at them, and nodded. "Thank you," she said. Her tone was steady, sincere. The twins exchanged a glance, then retreated to their room, leaving the basket behind. For the first time, the maid realized the children were testing trust, and she had passed the first test. Days turned into weeks. The maid's presence became a steady rhythm in the house. She cleaned, cooked, and quietly supported the household. But the twins began to notice that she was there even when the parents were not. They began to talk to her, not just with words, but with gestures, eye contact, and shared silence. Small victories, like finishing a puzzle or sharing a toy, became celebrated moments in the maid's gentle acknowledgement. The parents, still unaware of the depth of connection forming, remained focused on finding the next nanny who could handle the twins. They spoke about hiring more expensive, more experienced help. They did not realize that what the twins needed was not authority or strict rules. They needed consistency, presence, and understanding. And that was what the maid was giving them every day without planning to. One rainy afternoon, the twins were particularly restless. The maid, noticing their unease, decided to sit with them on the floor. She did not demand silence. She did not offer candy or distractions. She simply sat. She made eye contact, nodded, and occasionally commented softly on what they were doing. The twins, initially tense, slowly relaxed. One began to hum a tune, the other mirrored it. By the end of the day, the house felt calmer than it had in months. The parents, returning home, felt it too. Something had shifted, though they could not pinpoint exactly what. The maid's approach was simple, yet revolutionary in that house. She treated the twins as individuals with thoughts, fears, and feelings. She did not attempt to fix them. She did not enforce her own rules. She listened. She observed. She acknowledged. And, slowly, the twins responded. Even the neighbors began to notice a subtle change. The usual sounds of chaos that had poured from the house were quieter. The occasional laughter or conversation replaced screaming and shouting. It was not perfect, but it was real. It was human. And it was hopeful. As the weeks continued, the maid became more than just a presence in the home. She became a constant, someone the twins could rely on without fear of punishment or abandonment. She became the first person to see them as they truly were, without judgment. And in doing so, she began to change the trajectory of their lives. One gentle interaction at a time. The maid had been in the house for a few months now, and life inside had begun to change in ways no one had expected. The parents still worried about finding the perfect nanny, still assumed that discipline and experience were what the twins needed, but the maid quietly noticed things that others had missed. She saw patterns in the twins' moods, their reactions to silence, their fears and joys. She noticed that the children were not wild by nature. They were unsettled by inconsistency and the absence of steady care. Each day, she learned that one twin feared loud noises more than anything, while the other felt uneasy when attention shifted too quickly. She learned how they responded to gentle words, to calm gestures, and to acknowledgement. She observed without judgment, listening carefully to what the twins were expressing without realizing it themselves. One afternoon, the twins had been particularly restless. The maid decided to take them outside into the small garden behind the house. The grass was damp from the morning rain, and the sun was slowly breaking through gray clouds. The twins hesitated at first, unsure whether they could trust that leaving the house would be safe. The maid crouched down to their level, spoke softly, and asked if they wanted to explore with her. After a long pause, they nodded. In the garden, they found small creatures to watch, leaves to pick up, and soil to touch. The maid did not tell them what to do or scold them when they got messy. She simply walked beside them, commenting on what she saw. "Look at this worm. It is moving so slowly, where this leaf is so green and soft." The twins' faces slowly shifted. Fear and suspicion gave way to curiosity. They laughed quietly, and for the first time, they played without testing limits or waiting for punishment. The garden became a safe place, a world outside the constant pressure and chaos of the house. Back inside, the twins were calmer. They began to seek the maid's presence more often. Not because they needed someone to control them, but because she made them feel seen. She would sit nearby as they drew, read quietly as they played, or just fold laundry while they built towers of blocks. She never rushed them, never dismissed their concerns, never imposed her will. The parents noticed these small changes. They saw the twins laughing more often, arguing less, and sometimes coming to them for attention voluntarily. They could not explain it. They wondered if it was a phase or just luck. They still considered hiring another nanny, believing that professional help might accelerate progress. But no one understood that the progress was not about expertise or authority. It was about consistency, presence, and genuine care. One evening, the maid was in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner, when both twins quietly appeared at the doorway. They held out pieces of paper they had drawn on, their faces serious, yet expectant. The maid looked at the drawings and smiled softly. She asked them to explain, listened carefully, and responded with gentle comments. The twins' expressions softened. They realized that someone was paying attention, truly paying attention, without judgment or anger. They felt important. Later that night, after the parents had gone to bed, the maid found herself reflecting on the changes she had observed. She had come to the house to clean, to help with daily tasks. But over time, she had become something more. She had become a steady presence in the twins' lives, someone they could rely on, someone who noticed them and treated them with respect. This was a role she had not anticipated. It was one she accepted naturally. The twins began to show subtle signs of trust that were almost invisible to anyone else. They would leave small notes for her, hidden in books or under pillows. They would show her their toys, their collections, and even their fears, expecting her not to laugh or scold. She responded each time with patience and warmth. Slowly, the invisible walls between the children and the adults in the house began to crumble. At least in part because of her quiet influence. There were still challenges. The twins had bad days, moments of screaming, throwing toys, or refusing to eat. But these moments were no longer terrifying or uncontrollable. The maid handled them with calmness and consistency, never raising her voice or forcing obedience. She allowed the children to express themselves, guiding them gently, and the outbursts began to shorten and lose intensity over time. The parents, though still unaware of the depth of the transformation, could feel a difference. The house, once a place of constant tension and noise, now had moments of laughter, calm, and even quiet anticipation of what the twins would do next. They noticed that their children seemed less afraid, more confident, and occasionally even affectionate. One weekend, when the parents were home for a few hours, they watched the twins play with the maid in the garden. They did not interfere, did not give instructions, did not correct. The parents observed silently and realized that the children were happy, engaged, and calm. The twins laughed freely, spoke with curiosity, and even took turns showing each other small acts of kindness. It was not perfect, but it was real. And for the parents, it was the first time they had truly seen their children in months, maybe years. Without fear or tension dominating every interaction, the maid's role was still quiet and unnoticed by most people. She did not seek praise or recognition. She continued her cleaning duties, cooking meals, and maintaining order in the house. Yet her presence had become the anchor for the twins. They began to rely on her as a source of stability, safety, and understanding. This was something that no nanny before her had provided, something the parents had not realized was missing. Each day, the twins grew more confident, more willing to explore, more able to express themselves without fear of punishment. They began to share small secrets with her, things they had never told anyone else. She listened without interruption, validated their feelings, and guided them gently when needed. The trust she had earned became the foundation for real change in their behavior and their emotional health. It was not magic. It was not sudden. It was consistent, patient, and human. The maid did not lecture, did not scold, did not impose her will. She observed, listened, and responded with empathy and care. And the twins responded in kind, slowly shedding layers of fear and suspicion that built up over the years of inconsistent care and abrupt departures of previous nannies. By the end of the 3rd month, the house felt different. The walls no longer seemed so heavy. The twins were calmer, more confident, and more willing to engage with the parents. The parents, though still focused on practical concerns, could see the difference. They did not yet understand how it had happened, but they felt it. The house was no longer a place of tension and fear, but a place where growth, trust, and understanding could begin. And it had all started because the maid, who had come simply to clean, stayed long enough to see the children as they truly were, and to respond with quiet patience and care by the time the 4th month arrived. The house felt different, though the parents still did not fully understand why. The twins had grown more confident, more expressive, and more willing to connect. They were still children with moods that could change in an instant, but their outbursts were shorter, less frightening, and fewer in number. The maid had become a quiet presence that held the household together, though no one had formally acknowledged it. She continued her cleaning, cooking, and small tasks, but her attention to the children had become more intentional. She noticed subtle shifts in their behavior, learned their unspoken needs, and offered guidance without force. One afternoon, the twins were unusually quiet. The maid found them in their room, sitting on the floor surrounded by their toys. Normally, they would be shouting or moving about, testing boundaries, but today, they sat silently, their faces serious. She crouched down and asked softly, "Are you both okay?" The twins did not answer immediately. Then one of them looked up and whispered, "We are sad." The maid did not react with surprise or anger. She simply nodded. "I see," she said. "Do you want to tell me why?" The twins looked at each other, unsure if they could speak. Slowly, one began to explain in halting words, then the other added more. They spoke about feeling lonely when the parents were busy, about being scared when adults left the room, about missing someone who would stay no matter what. The maid listened, without interruption or judgment. She acknowledged their feelings. "It is okay to feel that way. I understand." The twins were quiet again, but this time there was relief in their silence. They had been heard. Over the next few days, the maid continued to provide space for them to express themselves. She encouraged small conversations, gentle play, and shared moments that allowed the twins to feel safe. The parents noticed that their children seemed calmer and more willing to engage, but they did not yet understand the depth of the change. They assumed it was a temporary improvement, perhaps due to their own presence or a coincidence. They were wrong. One evening, the maid overheard a conversation between the parents. They were discussing hiring yet another nanny, convinced that their children needed strict guidance. The maid listened silently. She realized that the parents did not yet understand that the real transformation was not coming from rules or authority, was coming from consistency, empathy, and genuine attention. The twins had learned to trust because someone had stayed long enough to see them clearly. That night, after the parents had gone to bed, the maid sat with the twins once more. She asked if they wanted to tell her more about their feelings. Slowly, carefully, they shared memories of past nannies, describing moments of anger, frustration, and abandonment. They had been punished for their emotions, dismissed for their needs, and ignored when they sought attention. Each story was small, but together they formed a pattern that explained the twins. Past behavior: the maid did not respond with shock or disapproval. She simply listened, nodded, and occasionally said, "I understand." She did not attempt to erase their experiences or replace them. She only provided a space where the twins could feel safe expressing themselves. Over time, twins began to show subtle changes in how they interacted with the parents. They initiated conversations, asked for help with small tasks, and even offered gestures of kindness, such as sharing toys or drawing pictures. The parents noticed these behaviors and were cautiously optimistic. They still worried that the twins might regress, or that the progress was temporary. But each small act of trust and connection built upon the previous one, creating a foundation that was becoming stronger with each passing day. One rainy afternoon, the twins were playing quietly in the living room. The maid sat nearby, folding laundry, when one twin approached her with a small notebook. He had written down thoughts, questions, and even a short story. The maid took the notebook, read it carefully, and responded with gentle encouragement. "This is very creative. I can see how much you enjoy writing. Would you like to share it with your brother?" The twins nodded. They read their stories aloud, listening to each other, laughing at the funny parts, acknowledging each other's ideas. The maid observed quietly, providing guidance only when necessary. The parents, who had returned home earlier than expected, watched from a distance. They were amazed at the level of cooperation, creativity, and communication they saw. For the first time, they realized that the twins were capable of far more than they had imagined, and that the change had been happening quietly. Guided by the maid's patient presence, the maid continued to support the twins in small but meaningful ways. She encouraged independent play, acknowledged achievements, and provided comfort when needed. She also set gentle boundaries, helping the twins understand limits without instilling fear. The balance of empathy, consistency, and guidance created an environment where the twins could thrive. As the weeks passed, the twins' confidence grew. They began to take initiative, asking for activities, helping with chores, and showing concern for each other. The maid noticed that their trust was not just in her, but in the stability of the household she helped maintain. They were learning that people could be reliable, consistent, and kind of lesson that had been missing in their early experiences with caregivers. The parents, now more aware of the positive changes, began to adjust their own behavior. They spent more time listening, observing, participating in their children's lives without rushing to correct or discipline. The house, once a place of chaos and tension, became a space of connection, growth, and subtle joy. The maid's quiet influence was transforming the family. She had come to clean, but she had stayed to care. She had observed, listened, and responded with empathy, patience, and consistency. In doing so, she had become the anchor the twins needed to begin trusting, connecting, and healing. The parents were beginning to see the difference, and the twins were beginning to feel safe, loved, and understood in ways they had never experienced before. The transformation was gradual, almost invisible at first, but undeniable. The house was no longer a place of fear and tension. The twins were no longer bound by mistrust and uncertainty. The parents were beginning to understand that true change did not come from authority or rules, but from presence, patience, and genuine care. And it had all started with the maid, who had arrived to clean and had stayed to nurture. Seeing the twins for who they truly were, and helping them find a sense of safety and belonging that had eluded them for so long. By the 5th month, the house had transformed in ways no one had imagined. The twins, once considered impossible to handle, had begun to blossom in small but meaningful ways. They laughed freely, played together without constant arguments, and began to show moments of empathy and understanding toward each other. The parents, who had been focused on finding someone to control or discipline the children, began to notice a subtle shift in the energy of the home. The house no longer felt like a battlefield, but had become a place where learning, connection, and care could exist. The maid continued to maintain her quiet presence. She cleaned, cooked, and organized, but her most important work was with the twins. She had become the steady force in their lives. Someone who saw them, understood them, and met them where they were emotionally. She guided them gently, acknowledged their feelings, and offered support without force or judgment. The twins had begun to trust her completely, a trust that allowed them to take risks, express emotions, and explore the world around them. One afternoon, the twins were drawing at the table, laughing quietly as they created stories on paper. The maid sat nearby folding laundry, occasionally offering a word of encouragement or asking a gentle question about their drawings. The parents peeked in from the doorway, amazed to see their children engaged, cooperative, and happy. They had never witnessed this level of calm and connection, and for the first time, they truly understood the impact of consistent care and attention. The maid noticed something deeper as well. The twins had begun to show empathy, not just toward each other, but toward her and even the parents. They would offer small gestures of kindness, share their toys, and express concern when someone was upset. These behaviors had been absent in previous months, buried under fear, mistrust, and the uncertainty caused by the constant turnover of nannies. The maid's steady presence had created a safe environment where the twins could practice and develop these essential social skills. The parents decided to spend an entire weekend at home, determined to participate more fully in the twins' lives. They were cautious, unsure how the children would respond, but the twins surprised them. They invited their parents to play, showed them their drawings, and even asked for help with small tasks. The house was filled with laughter and conversation. It's a sharp contrast to the tense silence and shouting that had dominated the past years. The parents began to understand that the changes were not due to strict rules or training programs, but to the simple, consistent care provided by the maid. One evening, the twins brought the maid a small tray of snacks they had prepared with her guidance. They had carefully arranged fruit, crackers, and a few treats, proud of their creation. The maid smiled warmly and praised their effort. The twins beamed, delighted by the acknowledgement. The parents watched, realizing that the twins were learning responsibility, creativity, and pride in their accomplishments. They were developing skills and confidence that no amount of strict discipline or expensive training could have achieved. The maid also helped the parents see the children differently. She shared small observations, gently suggesting ways to connect, guide, support the twins, without imposing fear or authority. The parents began to listen, adjust, and participate in the process. They realized that true change required patience, empathy, and consistency. The house had become a collaborative space where everyone, children and adults alike, could learn and grow together. Over the weeks, the twins' behavior continued to improve. They were no longer constantly testing limits or seeking attention through misbehavior. They were curious, cooperative, and eager to learn. They expressed emotions openly, sought comfort when needed, and showed compassion toward each other. The parents could see the progress in real time and felt a sense of relief, pride, and gratitude. They understood that the maid had been the catalyst for this transformation, providing the stability and care that the twins needed to thrive. The maid remained humble throughout. She did not seek recognition or praise. Her satisfaction came from the small victories, quiet moments of trust and connection, and the gradual changes she observed in the twins. She knew that her work was not about control or discipline, but about creating a safe, consistent environment where the children could develop emotionally and socially. One day, the parents gathered the family in the living room. They expressed their gratitude to the maid, acknowledging the profound impact she had had on their children's lives. The twins, who had come to trust and respect her deeply, smiled and clapped. The house was filled with warmth, appreciation, and a sense of shared accomplishment. The parents realized that their search for the perfect nanny had been misguided. What the twins truly needed was someone who could stay, observe, and care consistently, without judgment or force. The twins continued to grow and thrive under the maid's guidance. They developed routines, learned responsibility, and built strong emotional bonds with both the maid and their parents. The household, once a place of chaos and uncertainty, had become a nurturing environment where trust, empathy, and connection flourished. The parents learned valuable lessons about patience, presence, and the importance of emotional support, understanding that these qualities were far more impactful than any rules, instructions, or disciplinary measures. As time passed, the story of the twins and the maid became a quiet example of how consistency, empathy, and care can change lives. 14 nannies had walked out, unable to handle the children. The maid had walked in, stayed, and transformed their fate. Her patience, understanding, and steady presence had created a foundation for growth, trust, and emotional well-being. The twins had learned to trust, to communicate, and to feel safe. The parents had learned to participate, to listen, and to support their children fully. And the house, once a place of tension and fear, had become a home filled with connection, love, and hope. In the end, it was not the number of nannies, the rules, or the discipline that had made the difference. It was the simple, consistent presence of someone who cared enough to stay, observe, and respond with empathy. The maid had not only changed the lives of the twins, but had transformed the family as a whole, showing that small, patient acts of care can have the most profound and lasting impact. The twins' future, once uncertain, was now full of promise, built on the foundation of trust, understanding, and the quiet guidance of someone who had walked in and stayed long enough to change everything. Months had passed since the maid had arrived at the house, and the transformation was remarkable. The twins, once considered unmanageable and unpredictable, had grown into children capable of expression, empathy, and cooperation. The house, once tense and chaotic, now felt warm, calm, and alive, with the sounds of laughter and conversation. The parents, initially skeptical and focused on finding the next nanny who could control their children, now understood that control was not the key. Presence, patience, and understanding were what mattered most. The maid had become more than a helper. She had become a cornerstone of the family, someone who could be relied upon in ways no one else had. Her days were filled with ordinary tasks, cleaning, cooking, organizing, but every moment she spent with the twins was intentional. She observed their moods, listened to their words, and acknowledged their feelings without judgment. She guided them gently, allowing them to learn from their experiences while offering support when needed. The twins responded with trust, curiosity, and respect, slowly shedding the fear and uncertainty that had defined their early years. One morning, the twins woke unusually early, their minds buzzing with ideas and energy. They rushed to the kitchen where the maid was preparing breakfast and asked if they could help. She smiled, nodded, and offered simple instructions. The twins chopped vegetables, stirred batter, and set the table. Laughing at their own mistakes and celebrating small successes, the parents watched from the doorway, astonished at the level of cooperation and enthusiasm. They realized that this progress was not the result of strict rules or discipline, but of the consistent care and attention the maid had provided over months. As the day went on, the maid continued to involve the twins in small responsibilities, teaching them the value of teamwork and contribution. She praised their efforts, acknowledged their ideas, and provided gentle corrections when necessary. The twins responded positively, demonstrating patience, listening skills, and consideration for each other's perspectives. They were learning essential life skills, not through fear or coercion, but through guidance, example, and encouragement. The parents, who had once been frustrated and unsure, began to participate more actively. They listened when the twins spoke, asked questions about their thoughts and feelings, and shared in their activities. They observed that the twins were more confident and expressive, capable of communicating needs, desires, and emotions, in ways that were constructive rather than disruptive. The parents understood that the key to raising emotionally healthy children was not authority or punishment, but engagement, empathy, and consistent support. One afternoon, the twins decided to create a small play in the living room. They gathered props, assigned roles, and began to act out a story they had invented. The maid watched silently, offering encouragement and gentle guidance when requested. The parents, who had never before witnessed their children's imagination and collaboration flourish in this way, were moved. They realized that creativity and cooperation had been stifled in the past by fear, consistency, and the constant turnover of caregivers. Now, with a stable presence guiding them, the twins could express themselves freely and confidently. The maid also began to notice deeper changes in the twins' emotional understanding. They expressed empathy not only toward each other, but also toward the maid and their parents. They offered comfort when someone was upset, shared toys and ideas, and showed pride in their accomplishments. These behaviors had been absent when the house was filled with temporary caregivers and strict rules. The twins were learning to connect with others in meaningful ways, developing the emotional intelligence that would serve them throughout life. The parents, inspired by the transformation, began to implement small changes in their own routines. They dedicated time to sit with the twins, read stories, engage in play, and listen without judgment. They learned to observe, understand, and respond with patience. The house, once a place of tension and unpredictability, became a nurturing environment where everyone, children and adults alike, could grow and connect. The family learned that true change was built on relationships, trust, and consistency rather than authority or control. One evening, as the sun set and the house quieted, the twins approached the maid with handmade cards. Each card was decorated with drawings, stickers, and heartfelt messages. They handed them to her, shy but proud. The maid looked at the cards, read the messages aloud, and smiled warmly. She praised their creativity, acknowledged their effort, and expressed gratitude for their thoughtfulness. The twins beamed, experiencing the joy of recognition and validation for the first time in their young lives. The parents watched, realizing that these small gestures reflected profound changes in the children's emotional and social development. The maid's impact extended beyond the children. She influenced the parents, helping them recognize the importance of empathy, patience, and consistency. They began to participate actively, engaging with their children in ways that were constructive and nurturing. The family learned to communicate more openly, support one another, and value each member's contributions. The house, once a place of frustration and anxiety, became a space where trust, respect, and love were the foundations of daily life. Over the following weeks, the twins continued to thrive. They developed routines, practiced responsibility, and demonstrated growing confidence. They engaged in cooperative play, expressed their emotions openly, and interacted with the maid and parents in ways that were positive, supportive, and constructive. The family celebrated milestones, small achievements, and moments of connection, recognizing the value of consistency and guidance in shaping healthy development. The maid remained humble throughout the transformation. She did not seek recognition or praise. Her satisfaction came from witnessing the children's growth, the strengthening of family bonds, and the development of trust and empathy. She had arrived to clean, but she had stayed to nurture, guide, and support the family. Her steady presence had created a foundation for lasting change, showing that consistent care, patience, and understanding could overcome fear, mistrust, and previous challenges. By the end of the 6th month, the household had undergone a profound transformation. The twins were thriving, emotionally balanced, and confident. The parents were engaged, empathetic, and supportive. The maid had become an essential part of the family, her quiet dedication and guidance changing the trajectory of the children's lives. 14 nannies had walked out, unable to manage the children. But the maid had walked in, stayed, and created a lasting impact. The story of the twins and the maid was a testament to the power of presence, patience, and care. It showed that true change did not come from strict rules or authority, but from consistent support, empathy, and understanding. The house, once a place of chaos and fear, had become a home filled with laughter, connection, and love. The twins' future, once uncertain, was now full of promise, built on the foundation of trust, guidance, and human care provided by someone who had stayed long enough to change everything. And in that home, the lesson was clear. Sometimes, one steady presence can make all the difference in a life.